Welcome to episode 117 of Destination Linux. This is a podcast of opinions made up of 4 of the greatest minds ever. And because we have a special guest, that line might actually be true this time, or at least one of them is a great mind. And we're discussing our passion for Linux. I'm Ryan, and with me today are my superhuman podcasting friends. Noah, how are things, sir?
Hey, they are good. I'm doing good. I'm finally getting over my sickness and my cough and my death. So that's a good sign.
We are all very happy about that. And Michael, how have you been?
Been very hectic and busy this week, but also sort of over the sickness. It just kind of morphed into something else, so that's fun.
Everybody getting over the sickness. There we go. And we also have a very special guest this week, Chris. Chris, how are you, sir?
Hello, I'm pretty good. I've just mostly been working on my NeoCities website and looking forward to Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
Nice.
Everybody's looking forward to
Everybody's looking forward to Game of Thrones except
today?
Michael.
Is that today, Sunday, the day we're
Yeah.
recording?
Yeah.
Oh, my
Confession, I don't watch that show.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, we're not shocked because
Anything that's awesome, you would obviously be,
well, no, it's that he has to pay for it. If somebody would give them their
Oh, is that what
HBO
it is?
credentials, he would love to watch it for sure.
I'm
That
not.
seems like the humanitarian thing to do. I might have to help with that.
So for those who might not be aware, Chris Weir is a YouTuber with a very popular Linux and technology channel, ChrisWereDigital, where he makes videos on Linux software and all things open source. Chris was interviewed way back on episode 23 during the first iteration of the show, so you can go check that out. But before we get to what everyone has been up to this week, I just wanted to get some updates from you, Chris, since the last time you were here and appeared. So one of the questions I had when I was watching the interview back on episode 23 was, back then you were talking about Ubuntu Mate a lot. So is Ubuntu Mate still your distro of choice?
It's still the distro that I tend to recommend people in my personal life pick up when they're trying to get away from Windows 10. If they're looking for something that they can just use and get out of the way, which Windows 10 obviously is not, then Ubuntu Mate is definitely still my go-to on that one. But I'm a distro opera at heart. So what I'm running at the moment is I got a laptop over here with MX Linux.
Nice.
And that's really nice. The laptop doesn't really have particularly high requirements, so I just wanted something that's lean and runs fast. And boy, MX Linux runs fast. I also used MX Linux to restore an old laptop for a family member as well. This was a Windows Vista era laptop, so I needed something about as light but also user-friendly as you can get. MX Linux fit that bill completely perfectly. So that's been running away tickety-boo for quite some time now. But for my main machine here, I've got Manjaro. And
Nice.
I like Manjaro in the sense that you don't have the scheduled updates, so you can just keep it rolling, keep it running. But you also get pretty new software that comes down the pipeline quite easily. So I do a lot of streaming, I do a lot of gaming. So when there's new NVIDIA drivers, it's just a matter of just waiting for them to arrive. New versions of OBS, they just come through the door. And as a matter of fact, actually, although it's, of course, an Arch-based distribution, surprisingly enough, I don't even find myself using the AUR at all. Because nowadays, if there isn't a piece of software in the Manjaro repositories, I tend to look for go to Flatpaks or app images, and that pretty much has all my bases covered. In fact, I'm running the Flatpak of the piece of software that we're doing this podcast on right now, and it seems to be running really fine as well, which is quite nice. So yeah, just to sort of, but that's not to say that I've abandoned Ubuntu Mate. It's an absolutely wonderful distribution, and one of the things I like about it is that it's kind of got that, it acts like the way that you expect it to. Like there's a lot of sort of reinventing the wheel all across the tech sphere, and you get it on Windows, you get it on Mac, and you do get it on Linux to some extent. You get GNOME when they reinvented the desktop there. And even with some things with like KDE, even though it's a bit more traditional, it still has modern applications to it. And I got to admit, I don't know if this is me starting to sort of enter the realm of middle age, but when things work the way that I like them to work, it's nice to have desktop environments like Mate, like XFCE, that just maintain that sort of continuity, where just everything works the way that you know. And it might not necessarily be super efficient in regards to when they keep making improvements with new iterations of GNOME and KDE, but it's just being so familiar with what you have grown to learn to use that that it just does the job, and it's comfortable doing so. But a lot of my family use Ubuntu Mate, and they wouldn't try anything else right about now. They love it.
You've been doing your YouTube channel since, is it 2013?
Yeah, that's right.
What are some of the changes that you've seen covering Linux back in 2013 versus today in 2019?
There has been a lot. I think the biggest overall change has been the rising prevalence of Arch-based distributions. I think back in 2013, there might have been a few Arch-based distributions. There was of course Arch, but then you've got nowadays you've got Manjaro, you've got Antergos, you've got Architect, and I know that they've been around for a few years, but they sort of become a lot more popular these days. And I think that might have more to do with things like the gaming crowd, the multimedia crowd, who sort of, there are new features being added to things like OBS or Kdenlive all the time. Also, I have noticed that when it comes to Linux as well, is that where there used to be a lot of discussion about the distributions, and there still is, of course, today, there's also a lot of discussion around things, that more of the software on top of it. I mean, who hasn't had a long and lengthy discussion about Proton, for example, and all the things that's brought in. And Proton has completely, changed the game when it comes to Linux as well.
Nice.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the Proton is like we've talked about it on this show multiple times, so it's like a huge game changer. But what kind of content are you working on right now in like the coming months for your YouTube channel?
Well, that is always something of a challenge. In fact, I suppose nowadays, it's trying to work out to say something about Linux that hasn't already been said. But I've sort of been, moving my content a little bit further afield. I did a recent video talking about the British cup of tea, which I'm actually quite proud of. And seems to have gone down quite well. I've talked a little bit about some of the tech legislation, particularly the EUCD as well, European Union Copyright Directive. Tried to take a bit of a balanced look at that and try not to sort of lean in too much into the hype and the fear about it, although, there are some things to be concerned about with it, of course. What else? Well, actually, I'm probably going to be talking a little bit about NeoCities as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with NeoCities. It's basically
I've seen it only because of your channel and you talking about it on your videos. So I looked into it. It's really interesting because it feels like a modern approach to like the old GeoCities.
It is. That's exactly what it is. It's
That's
also
what I was thinking in my head. I was like, is the thing GeoCities or NeoCities? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. It's one of my favorite online services these days. They have a really good free tier, but I've recently upgraded to the supporter tier. And basically it's like a content management system of sorts that's on their hosted environment, where you just put in the HTML code, you put in the CSS code. You could put in a bit of JavaScript, but to be honest, most of what I do, I don't. I kind of want to keep it, keep it simple with that kind of thing, and just sort of play around with the code in a much more simple way. And it's just one of my favorite things to tinker around with, because it's something so simple and straightforward and almost like what the web should be. You don't have to necessarily have all these fancy PHP based CMSs if all you're doing is throwing up a glorified text document, and it sort of brings that back to what it should be, if you ask me.
So it's a free web hosting service, but it sounds like it has tiers. And is it open source, or what is the drive behind it?
It is open source. It's something of a community project. But yeah, so basically you can just sign up to it. They give you a small amount of space, but it's usually more than enough. I've not even broken 1%, I think it is, because I don't really use many images on the site. And yeah, you just put in the code, and they even provided the SSL certificates and all that kind of stuff as well. That's all done for you. It's one of the, in fact, even though we're talking about CSS and HTML, which are just initialisms that probably would be intimidating to some people, I actually find it the easiest way to put together a website. In fact, I moved a website over to NeoCities, which used to be on a WordPress install, because WordPress now is becoming there's more things to do, more options, more buttons to click.
Kind of becoming a beast to maintain, isn't it? Yeah.
It really is, yeah. So I just get back to basics, I thought, and especially for simple websites where you don't need that hulking great CMS.
I'm not going to lie to you, Chris. I can't tell you what great timing you have in this. Just this week, I contacted our people in that work for my company, and I said, "Hey, I need to be able to put up a new website. I don't want to maintain an entire separate thing. Can we just tack it on to our company website?" And they went, "Yeah, we don't really know if that's a really great idea." And I said, "Okay." And so I was looking for, I was thinking to myself, I wish there was some place I could just host a free website. The best thing that I had up until now was I was just going to go download some sort of HTML template and throw it up on a subdirectory of a server and then just route to it. I'm absolutely going to sign. In fact, I've already signed up for NeoCities, so I'm excited to play with it. Looks like you can even edit in Markdown.
Oh, can you?
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Appears so.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Ooh, nice.
So no, I got a Twitter. Somebody sent me a message in Twitter and they said, "Hey, DOS Geek, your website's a complete pile of bleep. If you want to pay me, I'll fix it for you." And I was like, "Well, that's great advertising." Obviously, if I was gonna, yeah, what a pitch! What a great pitch. So the answer is no. But maybe I should switch to NeoCities here, where it'll be much easier for me to maintain. Because WordPress, it's just I'm getting lost in my own site, and it really shouldn't be necessary because most of my content is just static, right? It's just, hey, these are events that are coming up. These are new things. So yeah, I'm gonna check this out as well.
Yeah, and I did a bit of an experiment on a bit of a journal part of my website to see if it was even sort of vaguely feasible to keep your own RSS feed running, and it is. Like just to put the code in directly for the RSS. So I've even got that on one of my pages. So it's I mean, It can even do. I wouldn't necessarily advise it for particularly regularly updated blogs or anything like that, but I've got a blog on there that has about 4 posts. So for something as simple as that, and it'll probably get maybe 1 or 2 over the course of this year, putting together the RSS feed for it by hand as well is a piece of cake. Although they even do supply you an RSS feed of sorts that just just demonstrates site updates. But that's not super useful, perhaps, for a lot of visitors to the site, especially if you're making small changes here and there. But yeah, I mean, even the RSS side of things is quite straightforward from my experience.
Nice,
very cool. Well, Chris, thank you again for guest hosting this week in Zeb's place. We're going to now get into the section where we ask everybody how their week's been. So, Michael, what have you been up to this week?
Well, I've actually been pretty busy despite somewhat of a setback. I was sick for a couple weeks ago, and I thought I was well, but turns out it was an ear infection that it converted into an ear infection. So I had to go to the doctor to get rid of that. But during the process of all of that, I somehow had a massively busy week for podcasting. So that's why I only have one earbud in, if you can't tell. And there's so I did so far this is the 6th podcast that I've done this week. I will be doing another one for This Week in Linux, so total of 7 this week, and that includes a podcast I was on, and I got interviewed on the Ask Noah show on this Tuesday this week, and I was also the co-host for Floss Weekly on Leo Laporte's This Week in Tech Network. And that we talked about it was episode 525 where we talked to Mycroft CEO, so that was pretty cool. I also did a podcasting for the Binary Times podcast where I was kind of a guest host sort of on that show, and that was pretty fun. So like overall, I have probably done more podcasting this week than I have like all last month. So, it's an interesting experience, especially when you can only hear a little bit out of one ear. So,
are they inviting you on, or are you wedding crashing equivalent to the podcast?
Well, I mean, technically one, it was kind of a wedding crashing, but they invited me in a roundabout way. The other one's, okay, technically the other one I wedding crashed that one months ago, and then they asked me to come back, so... That
was one of those trolls I expected to go nowhere, and then you find out, well, maybe he did actually.
I'm proactive, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So
that's pretty cool.
I was asked to come back, so that proves that I did do it right the first time. So that's okay.
I don't feel like you mentioned me enough in your interview on the Ask Noah show, but overall, the rest of it was very good.
I mentioned you like once.
Yeah, like once.
Maybe twice. I don't know.
To be fair, you've had your you guest hosted with me, and you weren't just an interview. You actually guest hosted the entire episode with me, Ryan.
Thank you, Noah. Now I
So
feel
there's
better
that.
about myself finally.
Yeah.
So speaking of Noah, how have things been for you this week, sir?
Dude, I went nuts. So Michael thinks Michael's gonna cry about his ear infection, and he went and did four podcasts. I did almost 35 hours of radio this week, and I couldn't breathe. Like my voice was going, and I kept coughing, but made it through. And I think I was on 4 stations. And yeah, and almost 35 hours of radio. It was crazy. It was just nuts. Nonstop broadcasting this week.
Very cool.
Very cool.
I actually did some editing too, so add an extra 10 hours and we'll count it.
Well, I don't have anything that exciting for the week, but I did have my local Linux user group meet, which went fantastic. And we tripled in size from the first time that we did it. And
Awesome.
The group got together, and the kids that were there, and with some adult help, built this Raspberry Pi touchscreen device here. So we had a little, a little fun project to work on while we're there, as well as we got to help the business owner out, a local business coffee shop, because they were having a grand reopening. And there wasn't a whole lot of people showing up. So when the Linux user group showed up, it started getting packed. And in a business, it's kind of like a dance floor. When nobody's there, everybody leaves it alone. But when you start seeing groups of people in the middle of a dance floor, everyone starts dancing, right? Nobody wants to be the first guy out there. And that's kind of how business works as well, in traffic and foot traffic. So once the crew kind of converged, the Linux crew at the coffee shop, then all the people started coming around, and we had people coming in to watch this be built while they were drinking their coffee and things like that. So it was just a really great time, and we got to help out a local business owner who also happens to work in Linux as his main gig, and is running this coffee shop on the side. So that was kind of cool. And he invited us back and gave us access to a whole room for our Linux user group for the events coming up, the next one on May 4th. And we had some people travel as far as 3.5 hours to get to this event.
Nice.
So I was just super impressed and really loved seeing everybody and getting to meet some new people. So that was a ton of fun.
Very nice. You actually kind of made me feel like I don't do enough on the ones that I run. Because like you showed some photos and stuff, you had like swag for people, had like projects to work on, and I'm like, hey, let's just talk. And I'm like, okay, I might have to do something extra.
All right, here, you want me to make you feel better, Michael? I can make you feel better.
What's that?
We hosted the first lug, and we neglected to understand the hours in which the university would lock the building that we were in. So 15 minutes before the lug was scheduled to begin, the maintenance went around and locked all of the doors, and nobody could get in.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is unfortunate.
So did you guys have it outside? Or
no,
what?
we had it inside, and I just every 15 minutes would run and bring in another gaggle of people that were lost and confused and walking into the door.
That's so funny.
It was super embarrassing.
Well, either way, definitely think about starting your own local Linux group if you haven't. It's a ton of fun, and it's a great way to meet and learn a ton of new things. I think the project, because there's a lot of interest in Arch there, shocking. I don't know if it's because I keep preaching, but I think our next project is some of the individuals were scared to do the install of Arch, so I'm going to invite them to bring their computers to the next event, in which we'll do a live install of Arch right there at the event on their machine. So
very nice. Make sure you have networking set up.
Shut up, Michael. All right, so just a reminder to the community that the page for Self, that Southeast Linux Fest, is live, and you can book your room now, either at the main event, or if that's full, then find a surrounding close by hotel there. And this time, thanks to you and your amazing donations, Zeb has booked his flight. You're going to be able to join the entire Destination Linux crew June 14th through 16th for all kinds of Linux goodness and shenanigans that we're going to pull there at Self. And if you can't make it, you will still be able to on our individual channels, and perhaps the Destination Linux channel as well. We'll be doing some live feeds on our individual channels. We'll also be doing a Destination Linux podcast there. We will also have an Ask Noah show that we will be doing some work on there as well. So even if you can't join, you can still be there. We'll make sure that you get a view into some of the fun that we're going to have. But definitely check out Southeast Linux Fest and get your reservations in now.
Yep, and I actually have an announcement. I submitted 2 talks for them to pick from for me to do at the conference, and they picked both of them. So I'll be doing 2 talks this year instead of the one. So that's going to be fun.
Can we get a hint of what the topics might be?
One is Kden Live Part 2 redo.
Nice.
Return of the Kden Live. And then the other one is going to be a marketing for open source.
Very cool. And Noah, you did a talk last time. Are you thinking about doing one this round?
I did not submit a talk because I am on staff this year at Self. And so my job this year is going to be making sure that people have Linux computers to present Kden Live on and not Windows computers in which they can't present Kden Live on. Right. So that will be my job. So that's what I will be doing. And I'll also be hosting the official live self stream. So we will have a live stream that will be occurring that you'll be able to check out some of the talks as well as get some of the commentary and a couple of guests that I'll bring on. I've got this good friend of mine, Ryan. He's going to join us from Destination Linux, and this guy that I tolerate called Michael, and I'm going to bring him on and chat with him. And then of course Zeb, we're flying him in, so we'll have him on and get to chat a little bit. But yeah, that will be the official live self stream in addition to the Destination Linux and the Ask Noah shows.
Awesome. Man, that Ryan and Zeb guy sound awesome.
They do.
Yeah, the other guy's cool. His hair's good though.
Yeah, his hair's
good.
So next up, Michael, can you tell us what's in store for us in our email this week?
Absolutely. We got an email first of all, it says, I'd like to let you know that I love the podcast. I recently became a patron to get the full unedited videos. I thought you were joking when you said how much you guys mess up, but it absolutely exceeded my expectations, and I love it. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was curious to ask you guys, have you heard of itch.io or itch.io? I'm not really sure if I'm actually supposed to say that or whatever. I hear a lot of Linux gamers and podcasters talk about Steam and their Linux support versus GOG and their DRM-free titles. Itch.io not only has DRM-free titles and Linux support, but the client is also FOSS. Beyond that, it is a fantastic source of indie games, and in my opinion, it's the best platform for indie developers to get started on. Like, I've used it as far as trying to try out the client, but I've actually not purchased any games yet. So, have you have any experience with it?
Yeah, I've got quite a bit of experience with it. I love it. I'm completely on board with this guy here. It's quite easy to get up and running. It's got a huge selection of games on, but they're mostly in the indie realm. It's got one of my favorites on, Long Live the Queen. I recommend anyone check it out. I'll just sort of leave it at that because it is just worth discovering on your own in that regard. And one of the things I particularly like about it is it's one of the things it does a little bit better than the GOG setup, which is it allows you to download the games without having to worry about the client itself. So if you go to GOG and you buy your game, you don't necessarily, in fact, with GOG, their client isn't even available for Linux. So you have to download the game as a package, as a package file, as a binary, which is fine. But they put that very much on the second rung of things. Whereas with itch.io, yes, you can install your game through the client, and it's as easy as installing a game through any client. But it's just as easy just to download the tarball or zip file or whatever and install the game into a games folder of your choice. And that's always, to me, I've always felt that just sort of shows the user choice because, not everyone's going to want to have the itch.io client. I mean, it's a good client, don't get me wrong. It's also based on Electron for those that might want to know that. You can also just go to the website, download the games as they are. They're right at the top of the page usually. And then just run the games as they are. And it's got a load of game jams on, including, I don't know if you guys probably know Gardner, the Linux gamer, but his games jam is being run through itch as well. And he does that every year, as well as countless other games jams. So you can pick up loads of really interesting titles that you always are trying to do new things with, mechanics and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, totally. I recommend anyone check it out.
So I checked it out when I got this email from Dax here, and it's Zeb would hate it, okay, because it's a lot of pixelated indie games. He wouldn't probably like it, but I think anybody who's a true gamer and loves to look at indie level gaming, and some of them are amazing, some of them have great graphics, but for the most part, you're going to see a lot of indie looking games. There's just a lot of selection and choice out there. I like that it's not just a store where you just get free stuff, although there is free things there. You can actually support the developers. You can follow them. They've created a kind of a whole Steam architecture, because that's the closest thing I could relate it to there, of community along with the development of the games there. So I thought it was amazing. I hate that I've missed out on it so long up to this point, and will definitely be looking to, find some good games on there and also support the developers by purchasing some of the games I like. There was also a lot of situations where the games had demos of the ones that you would purchase. So before you end up spending some money, you could definitely go in there and demo it and try it out. But their client is also fantastic. It's just a really, really well done client. A lot of times these clients are buggy. They're messy sometimes when you see some of these platforms people put together, but this was not the case at all. It's well thought out. It's very easy to navigate. Yeah, I really, really dig this and love that Dax brought it up to us.
Yeah, and there's also a really cool feature that for developers, that if you are a game developer, they have this where you decide what percentage goes to you and goes to the platform. So it's, instead of like, here's like a flat rate, you actually get to kind of collaborate with them and what you think that's what's worth it to you and kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Yep. So we want to hear from you, our listeners. Send in your favorite. This is what we're looking for this month. Linux software tip or trick. We would love to know what tools make your Linux experience amazing. Like Dax sending in here, you never know what tool you might say that you think everybody knows about, and then find out that none of us knew, or only a couple of us knew, or nobody in the community knew about it. So definitely take a look at your library, look at your favorite software or your favorite tip and trick in the terminal, and send it over to us at comments@destinationlinux.org.
In the news this week, we'll start off with distro news, and that is the 18.2 release of MX Linux. This is the latest version of the Debian-based distribution known as MX Linux. It's a combination of, like the name, if you're not sure, it's like a Antix and Mepis combination and stuff. And they have a partnership with development and collaboration with the Antix team. But this is a really interesting distribution because it's lightweight and powerful and has a ton of really cool features. And the latest version has them updating to Debian 9.8 Stretch. They've also updated their Firefox build for like having the latest version of Firefox. You also get some new encryption cipher options that are configurable for the MX installer. So it allows you to like select different like install locations for your encryption and that kind of thing. They've also done some updates to the MX manual, which is always fantastic to see because there's a lot of times where developers will leave the wiki and documentation as like a secondary thing, or maybe even not even do it in some cases. So
who reads those things?
I don't know, but apparently some people do find them useful. Whoever that might be. But they also did some really interesting things of doing some upgrades to the MX repo manager. And they've also, what's really cool, I think, is that they added the Antix Live USB system, which they have like persistence for using MX Live.
That's so great.
That is a fantastic feature. Being able to do having a distribution that has live, like basically any distribution can have live, but having built-in persistence is a very nice, convenient thing to give to someone. If you like happen to have a USB drive, you want to have someone try out Linux, and they could just use MX Linux and just get started right away. So that's pretty awesome.
So for people who may not know, Michael, do you want to explain why persistence is important, or what would be a use case for it?
Sure. Persistence is the ability to have stored configuration files or documents or things that you change on your system. So if you set up a live USB by taking an ISO and then burning it to a USB drive with Etcher or something, it will put the data on the drive so you can boot it and reuse it. But as soon as you change anything or turn off the computer or reboot, all of those settings and changes will be lost because it's not saving to anything specifically. It's just saving it to the RAM. So while you're continuing to use the system, it will continue to accept those changes, but as soon as you reboot, all of those are gone. Whereas when you have persistence, it will save it to the drive in some form or another and allow you to have, when you reboot, you have all the things that you changed still there for you.
Yep. So what I love is Dolphin's a friend of the show. He's been interviewed here, one of the last interviews, episode 47, if you want to go check it out. There's a ton of love for MX out in the community. And Chris, you were talking about utilizing MX on several of your machines, which is perfect timing for this story. as well. But some of the feedback that we've received recently is about accessibility when we talk about distributions, asking if we could do better in explaining some of the accessibility options that distros have in them, because there are people watching the show who have, various needs for, having accessibility options built into the distro to even be able to install it, which is something, I hadn't thought of a lot before. But since Dolphin's a friend of the show, I reached out to him and asked him about some of the accessibility options in there for MX Linux for those interested in installing it. So MX does include high contrast themes for low visibility impairments and some large size themes as well, and on-screen keyboard for mobility impairments. There is a tool that Debian has called Orca, and Orca essentially, when you're doing an install, reads the screen. And this is very important for those with any sight impairments that need to do an install, because without that screen reader, there's no way to know what is going on the screen. So it's very important. It's great that Debian has that. Unfortunately, Dolphin said they have not been able to get it to work in MX Linux, and he would love to have it implemented in MX Linux. So if anybody is willing to help and tackle the bugs there, he would love to get that running. So just out there in the community, if someone wants to help with that feature, definitely reach out to Dolphin or the MX team on their website and see if there's some assistance you can get, or figure out how to install it and let them know what you did. But if you've not tried MX Linux yet, I think you're missing out. It's always been in my top 5 list, one of my favorite distributions out there. I think it's one of the best Debian distros you can run. Chris, anything to add, since you're also an MX fan, on this latest release? Have you checked out 18.2?
I've not checked out 18.2. There are a few things about, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned the live persistence, because that was something I wasn't aware of. And I don't even know if many other distributions do live persistence these days. I know it used to be a big thing, maybe, was it 7 or 8 years ago? But nowadays it seems to have to not be the hot new thing. So I'm glad that MX Linux are keeping that alive. But it's also good in regards to the NVIDIA drivers. They have a really easy way to set up NVIDIA drivers, and also your proprietary plugins. You know, whether or not you're inclined to, but you have the ability to install things like Flash on it really easily as well, which have historically been a little bit trickier for Debian-based distributions. So for your more non-tech savvy, but also FOSS sympathetic user, MX Linux fits the bill really, really well. I've used it to fix up old machines before, and I've put them in front of people that don't know Windows from a Mac, and they've just managed to sort of ease right into it. So yeah, it consistently would make one of my top 5 as well.
Would you put somebody on MX Linux over something like Ubuntu Mate?
It depends on the machine in question. If the machine was particularly old and I wanted to sort of revive it, then I would go MX Linux. But Ubuntu Mate has that wider community support, or at least as of time of now, I guess.
Sure.
But,
no, I agree with that.
I, to be honest, it's not like they're worlds apart either. Like if, for example, Ubuntu Mate disappeared tomorrow, I could think of 5 distributions that would do, that I could recommend in its place. I think with MX Linux it has a little bit more of a standpoint that it on top of all the stuff that it does, on top of the user friendliness, on top of the support for devices like NVIDIA graphics cards, it is also really quite lightweight by comparison, and I think that's a big point in its favor. Also, of course, MX Linux famously not using systemd, and I'm not perhaps technically savvy enough to really understand the nuances of the pro versus anti-systemd arguments, but as a sort of more broad Linux user, I like the fact that there's at least choice on that system level of, for those that want to make use of the options.
Very good.
AV Linux has a new release of its Debian-based audio-video distribution. This is version 2019 4.10. For those that are not familiar with AV Linux, it is a pre-configured distribution designed to be a turnkey AV content creation distribution, pre-configured and ready to use, as they put, just install and create. So some of the features that they have are a custom real-time preempt kernel for optimal low latency audio potential, CPU governed for performance by default, extra tweaks for performance and meeting all of the criteria for real-time. Just a lot of really great things. I guess my question is, what is the advantage of these distros that are specifically designed for media content creation. And I ask that because everybody's workflow is different, right? Like it would be I would understand if we were living in a world where everybody used OBS and everybody used Audacity and everybody had kind of the same similar workflow. And so we just had essentially these appliance machines that were running Linux, and people wanted to have a distribution that was already pre-configured with all of these things. But that's really not the case. It seems like every time I work with a different content creator, they have an entirely different workflow with an entirely different collection of software. Yes, there are some of the main staples that are there, but everything varies. And then on top of that, not only do you have a AV distribution, you have multiple AV distributions. And I guess I just question, are there a lot of people out there that are going to do content creation and say, I am going to install a distribution specifically for content creation? I'm not just going to take my regular Linux laptop that I'm using for this, that, or the other, regular Linux workstation that I'm using for this, that, or the other, and just install the tools I need. What do you guys think?
Well, I know for me personally, when I came into Linux, the AV Ubuntu Studio at the time was super important because I didn't have anybody to go out there and say, hey, what should I use to do audio interfacing? What should I use to make my videos? You know, I could do web searches, but you know, a lot of times when you're searching through forums and things, number one, a lot of that stuff is dated. Number two, trying to figure out how to install it when you're used to a Windows platform where you go to a website, you download an exe, probably with some viruses included, but you download it and run it and install it. It's fine. But when you're just coming to Linux like I was, wasn't extremely familiar with how to get things installed. So I would be using the software stores that were available to get that software. So Ubuntu Studio was extremely appealing to me based on how they were describing it. I had all the things that I needed if I just click around and open all the programs to figure out, oh, that interface looks like a video recording software and that interface looks like an audio recording software. I had everything there. So for a new user, I think it's good. I can also see if people were just wanting to, quickly set up a studio without having to configure things like Jack and all of that stuff out of the box. So, if you get your latest Ubuntu, GNOME, Mate, whatever, you're going to have to, and you want to run Jack, you're going to have to go and install it and configure it and all of that. Or you could just install this or Ubuntu Studio and you have all that work kind of done for you. So I think there's advantages to it. I'm not sure it's for everybody, but I love the idea of just booting into these ISOs just to see what tools that they use that I've never heard of. Because even to this day, I still come across some. I'm like, I never knew that existed.
Yeah, there's also examples for like having Jack. If you've never used Jack before, the first time you try to install and configure Jack, that is a very complicated structure to get used to. Mm-hmm. So in this case, you could actually kind of like Ubuntu Studio and this AV Linux would give you an opportunity to try out Jack and to see what's the big fuss about before you go through the process of trying to set it all up.
Is there ever a point where somebody goes, hey, you know what? I like the fact that I have Ubuntu Studio, but now I would like to move on to a different distribution, but I can't because, take Jack, for example, Ubuntu Studio is the distribution that sets Jack up, and I don't know how to do that on myself, and essentially not necessarily locks them in, but essentially locks them into one distro over the other. Is that a risk?
I think maybe potentially for a while you're going to have to, and I think, you're going to have to, because a lot of them are going to utilize like KX Studio, that's kind of the go-to here. I think at first you're going to be relying on their defaults, and then eventually you're going to be configuring things for you. And once you get to the point where you're configuring that stuff on your own, you're probably at that point going to have enough knowledge to go set it up in any other distro for yourself anyways. But I think for a time period, yeah, you're going to be locked into their infrastructure. And certainly if you just want something that works and you don't want to go do your own configuration, just want to install it and go, then they probably would never leave. Or if they tested out another distro, they're like, well, I can't set up Jack, so I'm not leaving.
Fair enough.
And there's also the stuff with Ubuntu Studio where they're doing that whole new install a PPA and get some of their tools in whatever Ubuntu flavor you have. Like that has potential to allow them to transition to stuff.
See, that to me seems a lot more valuable than an actual distribution, right? Like when you have something where you say, and I'll give you a perfect example. Rivendell is a automation system that is specifically designed for radio stations. And Fred Gleason, friend of mine, who was the lead developer or is the lead developer for Rivendell, all of the software that he writes, it's all open source and it's all inside of a repository. So the distribution, the appliance distribution for Rivendell is really nothing more than installing a fresh CentOS box, a minimal install, and then running his scripts depending on which things that you want installed. I think that, to me, seems like a much more useful resource to the Linux community than a full-on distro, because at the end of the day, you have an ISO that you can just plug in a flash drive and it installs the distribution. Now you have all the tools you need. But the nice thing about having those individual tools broken out, or collection of tools broken out into scripts and installation repositories, is that you can essentially piecemeal together and add on the tools that you need to your existing Linux distribution, your existing Linux computer. I like that.
I think it definitely adds a lot to. I love that Ubuntu Studio is doing what they're doing. When you were talking about that, I was thinking back to my Linux days, and that's why I think both are kind of valuable to a degree. But I do like what Ubuntu Studio is doing to take it to a new level, because at the point where you're brand new to Linux, the idea of running a script in a terminal is like Chinese. It's just, I wouldn't, what is an SH? What is this tar thing? Like, all of this stuff is so foreign. So I think it's great that those options are available, and I love that they're doing it. But I also think having a distro there with everything built in has a lot of advantages for people as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you reckon there could be a particular application, for example, if you're running, or if you're at a Linux conference of some variety where there's going to be a lot of requirement for live streaming, podcasting, that kind of thing, where you would possibly be bringing in machines that wouldn't usually be used for that? You could slap on an ISO and you'd almost be there and ready to go with a number of machines, sort of almost a drop in and go kind of distribution.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. If you're going into an area to quickly set up something, you don't typically have machines set up for that purpose, but you're doing audio video work, then you could just put one of these ISOs on and be ready to go pretty much out of the box. Noah, you would be more familiar with that, but you probably always have everything set up anyway, so maybe not for you, but I could see the advantages for somebody in there.
Yeah, but I still remember what it was like starting out, right? Like I still remember the very first time I was trying to get OBS set up. And at that point, really what I needed that night was I needed to have OBS working so that I was able to do a broadcast the next day. And I was interested in learning how to set everything up and install everything properly and all of those kinds of things. But I didn't have time at that very moment to go through all of that. What I really needed was just to be able to plug a flash drive in and just boom, have something available. So I do understand, I do understand the other side of that.
Interesting. All right, so I am super excited about this next release. GIMP 2.10.10 has been released. And I was so excited until I saw in the Destination Linux group, people were already pinging Michael saying, is this it? Is this the time where all of the things that needed to be changed in GIMP are fixed? And then Michael was like, sort of. So we'll get into Michael's opinion here in a second. But this is certainly a huge list of nice improvements here. So let me go through some of them. Line art detection in the bucket fill tool for comic artists is a new feature. Various usability improvements and transformation tools. Sample merged option added to the heal tool and fixed in the clone tool. Parametric brushes now with 32-bit per channel precision. Easier brush and pattern creation flow on canvas layer selection. Faster saving, exporting, and layer group rendering. Initial DDS support and many improvements in the GEGL, the image processing engine. The layer selection has been something of a frustration for a while in GIMP, and this latest change makes it easier by being able to find a layer in a list by using Alt plus middle click to select the layers by clicking on the pixels. This will also display the layer name in the status bar, so they're giving you multiple ways to find your layers now. And Michael, I remember when we had this discussion and we were talking about some of the things that would take GIMP to that next level. This is one of the things you brought up. Look, I've got tons of layers. I need to be able to find them and organize them quickly. So when I saw this, I was like, yeah. But then the next thing I thought really got us there, Michael, where they said they're allowing real-time, non-destructive image manipulation here. So tell us some more about what your thoughts on somebody who's actually an artist that uses these tools, what you thought of some of these enhancements.
So there's a lot of stuff that's in here that is really good. And these are very much important features to be added for the future of GIMP and making it a bit competitor to the professional side. The bucket fill is actually really nice because even Photoshop has a very finicky bucket fill. So this is really cool that the way they did it. And the on canvas layer selection is really nice because even Photoshop is not that good in it. But this allows you to, when you hold Alt and you middle click, you can click on a pixel, and if you have multiple layers on top of that in that one pixel, it'll allow you to cycle through to find one really quickly, and it'll automatically adjust the layer palette as well as the status bar telling you which one you're on. So it actually is a really nice, quick way of doing the selection. So it's very much a good improvement. The non-destructive aspects, while is definitely the most important addition to this release, it's not a lot of it. So the thing that this is like a first iteration of adding non-destructive, which is fantastic and awesome.
Right.
But 90% of it is still destructive. So that's why it's not really like this release is not, ready for professional users and stuff. However, the heal tool and the clone tool adding those non-destructive features is fantastic because it allows you to apply the heal tool effects on a separate layer above the main layer so that the main layer's data is never touched, which is exactly what non-destructive is and what they should be doing for everything as soon as possible, because that is a fundamental feature of all image manipulation software, is to have non-destructive. So the fact that they're on that path is very exciting to me. So I'm thrilled that this release is coming because they've done all the improvements to the Gaggle engine and everything like that. So this is fantastic. And while it's not exactly what I want it to be yet, I'm really happy to see that it is on its way to getting there.
Yeah, I would love to have a developer from GIMP on to talk to them and get some more insight. They're ridiculously talented, obviously, in what they've been able to achieve. I mean, for most of us, GIMP does everything we need as normal users and consumers. And obviously, there's a professional level out there, and they are headed for that as well to bring those features in. Yep. Noah, do you ever use GIMP, or is this something you just pay somebody else to go build it?
I use GIMP all the time. I use GIMP as my go-to cropping tool. So if I take a screenshot of something, I'll go to and crop it down. Any of my actual graphic things that I do, it's mostly assembly of stuff. And so for that, I'm typically working with vector graphics, and thus I'm using Inkscape. And so I'm a huge fan of Inkscape. But if I need to go and edit something or something else, I'll do sometimes every once in a while, we'll go to maintain a website or we'll go to update something, and you'll get a client and they don't have access to their original graphic images. And so what we'll do is we'll go and take a photo of their logo or whatever the highest resolution copy we can get is. We'll go into GIMP and use the selection tools to remove everything but the actual outline of the logo. Then we'll bring it back into Inkscape, use the trace tool to actually get a vector graphic from the original logo, and now we've got something digital to work with. But GIMP is one of those things, you have your install script that you maintain. GIMP is one of the first programs I install because it absolutely has to be on every machine that I use because it is such a go-to tool.
Awesome. Chris, what are your thoughts on GIMP?
I love it. It's the best.
Yeah.
I use it for all my thumbnails, and it's always been something. To be honest, I'm not exactly a high power, I'm not like a power user in that regard. GIMP had everything I needed when it moved to the single window mode. Once it got rid of all
that was the greatest accomplishment ever.
Yeah. So ever since then, I mean, it's been getting better and better and better. I mean, faster export times are always good and that kind of stuff. But does it still use GTK2?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
The GTK3 will be added in the 3.0 release of GIMP when they do the full refractor release, which will have a lot of other non-destructive things too as well. So they're coming out with a lot of new stuff that I am super excited about.
I do like that you can actually still select the legacy icons as well. I can't say I'm too much of a fan of the monochrome icons because it's like they're just like not as identifiable, if you know what I mean. But you can just go into the preferences and switch them back. Which
That's
is
probably
good.
to fit the more modern style of UI, because when people who are professionals look at GIMP, they just look at it as a toy, and this is kind of like making it more polished for them in that way. But I think that is kind of fun that they give you the options to go back if you want to, and they still give you the options to do the multi-window mode if you like that for some reason. But I agree that single window mode is much more convenient and efficient. Just as it's a lot easier. You don't have to like move every time it loads. You don't have to move things around. It's much nicer. But GIMP is a really good tool for 95% of users.
Yeah, and we did say, pros and not pros, and Wendy in our Telegram chat said not good for pros, ... well, not for all pros. So obviously some pros can utilize GIMP.
It depends on what you're pro of. I guess let's be more specific. A pro of what specific type of thing? If your main thing is image manipulation, then
shots fired, Michael, and I love it.
I mean, GIMP is great.
You don't have to say anything.
GIMP is great, and the dogs agree.
OBS 23.1 has been released. A new release that comes with new features and bug fixes. OBS is the go-to program for live streaming and desktop recording. Some of the new features of 23.1 include additional or added optional Twitch activity feed panel when account is connected to OBS, hidden by default. You can show it in the View Docs menu. It's added Restreamio account integration. So for those of you that don't know, Restreamio is one of those web services that allows you to stream to something like both Twitch and YouTube at the same time. Account integration is still currently only available in Windows. The added option to select color range to Linux video device source. Added ability to copy and paste filters from the mixer. Added preview program labels to studio mode, added new settings icons, added a checkbox for bandwidth test mode in settings when using Twitch account integration, added area scale filtering for sources as an alternative to point scaling, may preserve more detail on retro games, and in addition, they fixed several bugs. One that impacted Linux directly was the tray icon now uses icons from the system theme.
What do you think of this update here, Chris? Because you probably utilize OBS quite a bit yourself.
Yes, well, I use OBS on a pretty much daily basis now. I use it mostly for Twitch streaming, and it is a pretty wonderful piece of software. It was always good when they announced the first Linux port. I remember using it on alpha, and it was actually pretty workable even back then, and it's only got better ever since. And it's quite nice to see it reach more and more distributions, native repositories as well. I'm particularly interested in seeing the attack release processing of the expander audio filter. So that one should. I mean, not that I think that it was necessarily particularly inferior before, but that's quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, every time that they've brought out a new release so far, there have always been tweaks and sort of small factors that improved it. I've liked the studio mode as well, so you can actually change one scene as another is being broadcast. That's particularly useful, especially when you're messing around with windows and bits and pieces.
Oh yeah.
And they give you a fair amount of filters as well for each of the various scenes for your webcams and that kind of stuff. And as well as you can also sort of play videos as part of the scenes as well. So if you happen to need some be right back highlight reel footage, then that's easy enough to slip in and go as well.
So I did a community outreach on my YouTube channel, a poll to ask through the donations that I'm giving, all the money that I've made on YouTube this month to Linux distributions and things out there, which one the community wants, since they're watching it and kind of raising the money from the ads, which one they wanted, what tool or organization they wanted me to donate the money to. And OBS was just one of the options on there. And I couldn't believe how many people voted that as a huge percentage of wanting the donation to go to OBS. And it just shows you how popular this tool has become, not only for us, but for many people, apparently not even potentially doing streaming content, but perhaps recording documents or creating tutorials or other things that they're doing with it. It's just an incredible tool that I don't know if Linux could. It's one of those tools where I don't know that Linux could be as successful without it. It's
become the standard.
Yeah,
it's become the standard in the streaming world. Like when you look at streamers, when you look at places that pop up for assets for streaming, one of the things that they market it as is, hey, this works with OBS. When NewTek came out with their video over IP interfaces. One of the first software applications to support it was OBS. And the reason for that is because that they know that if you're going to do video streaming, if you're going to do video content creation, you're probably using OBS, or at least you're starting there, maybe move on to something later, but that's the starting point. And you're seeing that pop up in churches. You're seeing that pop up obviously all over the gaming streaming scene. And then the other thing is, and you kind of briefly touched on it, people who want to make tutorials and want to have a really fancy way to grab their screen or want some extra options in doing some screen capture. This allows them to do that. This allows them to put an overlay. It allows them to choose what portions of the screen they're capturing, which windows they're capturing. They can, in OBS, compose a scene that is collected of various different windows. And so it's become a very powerful tool. And the interesting thing is, because it's open source, we know that the plug is never going to get pulled out from under us. So people like me are willing to base entire workflows and start entire shows with the presumption that we're going to have access to software like OBS.
Yep, that's a great point.
And I've also actually seen it being used quite a lot for podcasting as well, because the audio features alone on OBS are pretty wonderful. You can do a lot of compression on the fly, for example. So when you've got a several-way chat going where people's audio is going to be of different sources and of different slight differences in volume and compression on their end, you can then get a more consistent sound by fiddling about with some of the compression settings in the audio filters as well.
Yeah, that's what we do. That's what we use for doing this podcast. Actually, it's OBS. So, like, OBS is a fundamental piece of the workflow for me and this podcast and everything that I do. And there's a lot of stuff that is a nice polish that they have done in this latest release. And this is completely ridiculous, and I admit this, but this is really a nice feature for people who are just getting started in OBS, and that is when you hit the studio mode and it shows you the preview and like the actual like viewer. Before this latest release, it didn't tell you what each of the boxes meant, and every time I would talk to someone, they're like, "Oh, it's multicam." I was like, "Well, technically, no, it's not multicam. It's a preview versus a like actual like recording section." And then now they actually have the label there, and I know that's not really important or anything, but I just think that it's nice that they're doing even like tiny little polishes like that to bring it to like.
Yeah, that polish is important. I disagree.
I'm saying it's not important for me to talk about why it's a good thing for this release of me going like this is great, but it's like when I show them the studio mode, like, oh, I understand it immediately now. It's like that's awesome.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So up next in the show we have hardware news. And this is a really exciting update from AMD. The second-gen Ryzen Pro and AMD Athlon Pro mobile processors have been announced and are available for laptops and being built into like manufacturing and stuff. So this is great news for those who are looking for a Team Red laptop. As they're planning to include these new processors in the later models of this year for like HP and Lenovo and those kinds of things. This is really, really cool because while I've laptops, I've recently become a Team Red member, and I'm wanting to have a laptop that has AMD for a long time, and you couldn't really find one. So it's true. At least not one like up-to-date hardware. So it's really great to see this happening because this allows you to have your whole stack Team Red, which is cool. And they also said that this is going to offer up to 12 hours of general office use and up to 10 hours of video playback with these new processors. So that's awesome.
Yep. I mean, this is super exciting news. There is not a week that goes by that I do not get asked, what laptop should I buy with Ryzen in it? I hear you talking about Team Red. I want a Ryzen laptop. And there are options out there, but the manufacturing process, and I think what happened is there was a point where nobody wanted to touch anything AMD. If you were getting an AMD laptop, it was in a $200 Walmart special that you avoided like the plague unless you had no other option. And then Ryzen came out and kind of changed the whole game. And now you have something that's not only a competitor, but in many cases beats out Intel, depending on the line and processor and things, but certainly a great competitor. And the manufacturers have taken a long time to ramp up, probably a long time to try to build some trust to say, is this really what the community out there wants, is for us to kind of change our lineup and throw the Ryzen in there? Is it a recognizable name that people are going to walk in a store and see and say, I want? And I think what you're seeing here is the answer now is yes. The manufacturers all have a line of Ryzen laptop now. And now that line is continuing to expand bigger and bigger because it has brand recognition, because people are going to walk in and see it. And I remember in my dad's family store, he loved IBM. And back then, and one of my favorite processors ever was the IBM Blue Lightning, 75 megahertz of pure awesomeness. And I loved IBM processors too, because that's what my dad loved, and they were reliable. But people started coming into the store and saying, hey, do you have that Intel Inside thing? Because the commercials started running. And we realized we're going to go out of business if we don't start adding Intel into our lineup. And that's what I think why you're seeing that it took so long for manufacturers to throw Ryzen into their laptops is, again, like I mentioned, that brand recognition and making sure it's something consumers understand and want. And I think AMD has done a fantastic job getting their name back out there. You're getting 14% faster content creation on these with their Vega graphics integration, which is amazing. So you're getting not only a great CPU that is power efficient, but you're getting a very powerful Vega graphics card included with that as well. You're getting lots of security features that the Ryzen Pro processors have. It's just a fantastic thing to see that HP and Lenovo are finally going to release these, because I'll finally be able to point people, just go get this and stop asking me that question, which will be great too.
I can't say for much with AMD on the laptop side of things, but I've been running my AMD Ryzen in my desktop now for over a year. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
My last processor in this machine, which was pretty old, I think it was like an AMD Phenom or something to that effect, and that always served me well. So I thought one good turn deserves another. So I got an AMD Ryzen to follow up, and it's absolutely wonderful because also you don't have to necessarily have UEFI. Like you could switch it over to the old BIOS, which it pretty much supports Linux as a first-class citizen in
right.
that regard. I've had zero problems whatsoever with it. The BIOS is nice, and you can, it's all straightforward, all that kind of stuff. And it's one of those things where when it's all working, you almost don't even know it's there, kind of thing. And that's very much been the case with AMD for me, and the Ryzen for me, is that it just completely does everything that I've wanted it to, and they're not even that pricey. Really, yeah. I mean, if you look at an Intel equivalent, you'd probably be paying a couple of $100 more. But I'm running pretty fast, games. I'm doing the multimedia, streaming, you name it, and the AMD at its 16 cores or whatever it is, it's just taking it in its stride. Like I haven't even come close to maxing out this thing. It's wonderful.
That's the interesting thing. So I came from the Intel i7 6700K, and now I have the Ryzen 2700X. I don't think I've ever seen the processor CPU usage go above 30%. That's gaming and streaming at the same time. Obviously, some of that gets handed off to my video card, but I can't get the CPU to actually be stressed. It just doesn't stress. There's nothing to throw at it to use everything that's there that I found yet. And that's an amazing experience to me and testimony. I mean, the i7 6700K was a great CPU as well. But this, I just absolutely love. So you're officially Team Red, right, Chris? Everything you have is Team Red?
No, actually, no. I do have there is an Intel in the Entroware laptop, but I got that.
But you don't have NVIDIA stuff anywhere. That's what we're concerned about.
Oh, I've got an NVIDIA graphics card.
Oh gosh. Okay, we're gonna have to kick you off the show. Sorry.
No, it was nice having you.
Yeah, it was nice having you. So you're running the Intel, or you're running the AMD CPU with an NVIDIA GPU, which I've done in the past as well, and that works great. Because some people get confused about that. They think, oh, if I have an AMD CPU, I have to have an AMD GPU, and that's not the case at all.
And no, it's zero problems whatsoever. And actually, it's an NVIDIA GTX 970, so it's not the newest card around. But again, it's served me well. I'm not exactly running a high def monitor, so I don't really need anything faster than that. But yeah, the two have worked together flawlessly, as if they were, from the same manufacturer.
Nice.
Red Hat is going further with ARM. While getting Linux to run on ARM-based laptops has been around for a while, Red Hat is looking to make Linux support more official and smooth in the coming months. Now, I had a chance actually to speak with Brandon Johnson about this and talk to him about about what Red Hat is doing. They're going to be working with the Fedora team to get ARM laptops very soon, and that's very exciting. The other thing that is pretty neat is that ARM is going to be a major focus of the release of RHEL 8. And so as RHEL 8 comes out, they are going to be putting a focus on the ability to run on ARM-based appliance-like machines. Now, I asked Brandon Johnson specifically if that would be for if they would be geared towards Raspberry Pis, and he said no, not necessarily. While it would obviously help on the Raspberry Pi front, really what they're looking for is more commercial grade ARM style devices, because ARM is essentially, as we know, doubling in power every year, and so it makes sense to Red Hat to be there and allow people to use Red Hat as an enterprise operating system to run on some of these devices. ARM-based computers are becoming more popular, and the limitation of Chrome OS and even Windows iteration often makes them difficult to utilize for productivity. So full-blown Linux solution and optimal power answer this, and is a less hacky approach to getting Linux to work on ARM laptops. So this is a very welcome change and something we're excited to see with things like the Pinebook Pro and more refined ARM hardware from Lenovo and HP. Obviously, all of the compute sticks that are coming out that you can plug into your TV that just have a little HDMI dongle, and they have a small little ARM computer inside of them. The ability to run Linux on those things is going to be key and a huge advantage to those who want to kind of branch out. And again, as Ryan was saying, play with something other than the go-to standard of Intel.
Yep. So I was super excited about this news. I'm also excited about everything we're seeing in the extension in the ARM arena, like the Pinebook Pro that we're going to have here. There's a lot of ARM hardware that is now getting more and more refined from manufacturers like Lenovo, HP, and Dell. It used to be you'd pick up an ARM-based laptop in the store, and it just felt like, I mean, the keyboards would like flex in.
Yeah.
The monitor was all blurred out. It was just a big pile.
And honestly, even if you look past the hardware build, the actual performance, right? Like you go to boot these things up, and the reality was even the actual performance where you'd get into this thing, and it's like, well, this driver didn't quite work right, or the mouse would freeze up a little bit because the desktop environment had some stupid bug in it. And there was just all sorts of weird things that would occur. And now what we've seen is what you watched the industry look over and go, hey, look at that $35 Raspberry Pi. I wonder if we could use that. And I kid you not, this is a real example, in a medical device. Could we use the Raspberry Pi to power a medical device? And I think the ARM industry, and I think software manufacturers like Red Hat went, whoa, that's not what we had in mind. Like, it was designed to teach kids how to use computers. It was not meant to be put inside people's bodies. That's crazy. And so they kind of reevaluated. And then you had hardware manufacturers that went back and said, okay, if you want to use this ARM infrastructure in that kind of way, let's make an ARM computer specifically for commercial purposes. Now what you're seeing is the other side of that, whereas Red Hat is coming in and saying, okay, you're making a ARM computer. Now let's give you some software that's designed for it, and we'll support it at an enterprise level, just like we would, workstations or servers.
Yep. I think that's fantastic. And, if you look at Chrome OS and you've ever played with it, it's not a terrible operating system, but it is terrible for anybody wanting to do anything productivity wise. The way the file management system is set up, the way it wants to force integrate everything into the cloud. So local storage not only is completely limited because most of them almost come with nothing, but also just trying to find files or arrange files within it is terrible. And even using Linux on top of it, which is an option, still you've got this fractured operating system leaving files in two different areas of the file manager, and it's just a mess. And then you look at Windows and you're looking at this ridiculously bloated operating system on top of hardware that's just not meant, not enough RAM, first of all, and just not enough processing power to really implement it. So Linux is the perfect optimal solution for ARM based here, because you can make it as heavy and light as you want. And Michael, I know this was a pet peeve of yours for a long time, but it kind of reminded me of, how people used to always say KDE is really heavy. Yeah. And, the reality is you could strip it down to be as light as any other desktop out there. That modularity in Linux is why something like an ARM laptop, depending on what power or RAM or whatever the hardware, you were talking about a medical device there, Noah. I mean, you could put minimal amount of hard drive, and you could customize very easily by just removing some of the, overly graphical features or things that you wouldn't need on that medical device to accommodate Linux very easily. It's the perfect operating system, honestly, for ARM hardware, I think.
Yeah, and also the medical device is interesting because there was this one project where they did take a Raspberry Pi and did like an automatic insulin pump using the Raspberry Pi to create it, and it was like more of a prototype thing that they kind of eventually turned into its own product. But they used the Raspberry Pi to get started. So like the ARM is becoming so much more important than it has been for years, and it has like so much potential on the enterprise level as well as on the laptop level. So I'm really happy to see that like there's a big backing behind the laptop side, because as Ryan said, there are, in the past there were some Chromebooks and some ARM based laptops, like generic laptops that were just like flimsy nonsense really. And now that we have stuff like the Pinebook and the Pinebook Pro that's coming out is really, really cool to see, because like the Pinebook first version is actually impressively built for how cheap it is and all the specs it comes with. And then they announced the Pinebook Pro, which is going to be like an aluminum body or something like that. Like the amount of
I can't wait to buy that thing.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Second that thing comes out, in fact, I'm gonna check right now again. Every time I think of it, I go and check to see if I can buy a Pinebook Pro. I can't wait to have a Pinebook Pro.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
Yep. All right, so up next in the news. So when I saw this article, I wanted to bring this up and discuss it with all of you, because I wanted to kind of get some insight into your thoughts on what's going on. So work is continuing. The article is work is continuing from Canonical to add ZFS support in the Ubuntu desktop, along with ZFS root partition support. While the work is progressing, it will likely not be completed by 19.04, but may show up in the 19.10 cycles. The goal is to allow for more simplified ZFS support on Linux with their stock kernel packages. But then I noticed at the same time, Red Hat is working on Stratus for their storage, and SUSE is pushing ButterFS. And some are starting to complain. I'm seeing in different forums, I'm seeing Reddit posts about it and about bringing up old articles as well about this, because this apparently is not the first time, that this is a legal gray area for Canonical due to the Oracle Sun CDDL licensing and its compatibility. So I really wanted to bring it to the experts here and ask you guys, what are your thoughts on this fork in the road with the file systems? You've got each player going their own route. Then you have a bunch of people saying Canonical's going down the wrong route. What do you think?
Well, Noah's obviously a big fan of ButterFS, so we'll get to him in a second. But this is actually really cool, because the ZFS is a really useful file system, and it's been around. Like, it is unfortunate that Sun decided to use a license that is technically not incompatible, but at the same time not compatible with the GPL. So it's like the GPL has requirements that the CDDL kind of, in a way, is like abrasive to that requirement, in the sense of like it's more open, but at the same time kind of contradictory to the GPL, which means that it is technically compatible, but at the same time that there is that gray area. So ZFS is really cool because of like how expandable it is and how reliable it is and all the compression tools that it has. So I think overall this is a good thing. And if there are other distros that are working on making ZFS support, but I don't think there's any way for any of these projects or these distros to not just accept that there's gray areas going to be there, because it would require Oracle to relicense it, and that's pretty much probably never going to happen.
What do you think, Noah?
I think that ZFS someday will become the only file system we use on servers. I think there's going to rapidly become a point where ZFS is such a robust file system that has so many features that there's going to be a point that anybody that wants to run something seriously on a server runs it on ZFS. And I say that because as a true bona fide Linux guy, if I have to store something, I go through the trouble of spinning up a FreeNAS server so that I can use ZFS, and then I map that with NFS back over to my CentOS box to actually use in production. Because if it's important data, I'd rather it be sitting on ZFS than even X4 or XFS or the renowned and my beloved ButterFS. Right? I tend to trust ZFS just a little bit more than ButterFS most days. That end with Y. So I've gotten to a point now where I believe that as ZFS starts to come over to Linux and you start to see it integrated, I think that's I think that's going to become the de facto standard. In response to the license thing, what I would tell you is that for years and years and years, companies were concerned with using Linux in enterprise because they were concerned of what the license snafu might entail. And nothing ever came of that, right? Like there's still people out there today that are like, well, I couldn't use Linux in my business because you never know. Someday the Unix people are going to come back and say, yeah, come on, that's not going to happen. I think that the people that have designed ZFS, and I think that the license holders and all of those things tend to work out. And I think what you're going to find is that's going to be a repeat of the Linux licensing structure where it just ends up being no big deal, even though there's some people that were worried about it.
Chris, any thoughts on this?
No.
You're like, hey, I'll just use whatever it tells me.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm one of those people that's like ext4 has.
There you go. It's kind of the one that kind of defaults for most. But one of the things that I thought interesting, I wanted to get your opinion on for the group is you have Red Hat going one direction with Stratus. Mm-hmm. You have SUSE pushing ButterFS, and I get that we all love ZFS, and I've been playing with it a lot since I've been working on my FreeNAS server, obviously. But they're going towards this ZFS. Is this another situation where we're just going to have everybody pushing their own path because they all want to be like, have their own way of doing it, nobody collaborating, and so we just continue with our fractured ways?
Well, it usually does come round to, one winner, or at least that's how sort of history, even when it comes to something like Systemd, where there was a lot of fractured ideas about, well, actually, we'd rather not have Systemd. And then eventually, pretty much all, OSs then came around to using Systemd, barring a few exceptions. And even actually something like MX Linux even has the option to switch out for Systemd. So I suspect there will be one that comes over supreme, and I think it's just going to be a case of, I don't know, time will tell on it, I guess. I know that Linux Mint are actually trying to push ButterFS because of its snapshot ability, and they're trying to bake it into their backup tool. So I can't say I've ever sort of trusted ButterFS enough to really put my to let it back up anything genuinely important of mine. But it would be interesting to hear if from the Linux Mint community how that's going for them.
Yeah, I think ButterFS is got a lot of cool ideas and a lot of the approaches. It's just like there are certain things that are like missing that are just unfortunate in the sense of like certain types of RAID doesn't really work for ButterFS, and and a lot of times if you install OpenSUSE, which is the SUSE is the ones are backing ButterFS. If you install OpenSUSE, there's a multiple different structure. It's not just ButterFS and that's it. It's like multiple different file systems depending on what the purpose is. But I think that ZFS is definitely the de facto for for something, if you want the storage to not worry about losing those files, and it's like the best like NAS approach. And I think that it's interesting because without this licensing snafu thing, ZFS would probably be already adopted heavily because we've already had.
I was going to ask you that if this licensing issue wasn't here, would this whole issue be mute and everybody would just be on ZFS?
I think that is a complete guarantee. Yeah, without this licensing gray area, ZFS would already be the dominant one.
But we're going to get there anyway, though. I really believe we're going to get there anyway. I mean, do you, I guess, Michael, since you're kind of taking the opposite side, I'll ask you, do you really believe that there's a time, do you really believe that 10 years down the road, CentOS, Ubuntu, the big server distros aren't going to support ZFS out of the box? It's not just going to be a checkbox?
I think they're going to support it out of the box. I just don't think that they're going to put all their eggs in that basket. Like, I think that ZFS, without the licensing thing, ZFS would already be the de facto.
Okay, So what I would say to that is that's a good thing. I don't want everybody to just accept something as a de facto standard and stop innovation. I want support out of the box so that I can click a box and then I can have ZFS. I want that. I don't want Red Hat to stop inventing the next ZFS, right? Because so to Chris's point, yes, X4, I've never had a problem with it. Never had a problem with X3. Like, they're great file systems, and I have no reservations about my data not being safe. Now, I have some reservations on if a drive fails, which wouldn't be affected by ZFS because it's going to handle being able to move data between multiple drives and stuff like that. Whereas X4, if you don't layer like LVM on top of it, you're not going to have that kind of functionality. But if everybody was just happy with X4, maybe we wouldn't even have ZFS, right? So I don't want to stifle innovation. I'm glad that there are people out there that are not going to accept it as a de facto standard and will continue to develop. That's good.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that you're right. I mean, Ubuntu has already been working on making support for ZFS for a while. So I think that they'll probably have it, because they were trying to release it for 1904, but it doesn't appear that they're going to get it to that ready. So with 1910, if they get it like a solid release, they might even offer it in the server function of the 2004 LTS, which would be really interesting to see if they do that, because that would be like kind of a game changer as far as like what file systems are used in the Linux world for, you know, enterprise and that kind of thing.
Interesting.
When you set up something like a DigitalOcean droplet, it uses just a standard image, doesn't it, and then sets you straight up there and then. So you do you even choose the file system for DigitalOcean droplets?
No.
So I suppose in sort of cases for me who aren't particularly savvy to such things, I suppose, would we even notice a difference over time if that's effectively what we're looking for? One of
my not complaints, but one of my criticisms of DigitalOcean has been, I would really like to see the option to, and they're working on it, but I would love to see the option to use a standard ISO, because what you have found and this is true, this is not DigitalOcean specific, it's any VPS provider, they use different they use slightly modified ISOs, or they use slightly modified versions of the distribution, and sometimes those are not binary compatible with software. And so we've run into issues where we go to spin something up on a VPS provider, it doesn't work. But when you install it with the actual ISO image, then it's there. Now, thanks to DigitalOcean's community guides, there's a bunch of guides on how to essentially suck up a installed distribution and then move it over to a droplet, and you can do that with a QCOW2 file. So that is a possibility, and there is a workaround for it, but it would be nice to be able to just upload an ISO and actually install. And if we went that route, then you would have the ability to actually choose your file system.
So let's move on to some gaming news. And first is this really, I'm excited that this is happening, because it shows that the company is putting the effort into maintaining their releases, even after the game has already been released. And that is Aspyr Media has confirmed that the DLC that was announced by Gearbox for Borderlands will be coming to Linux. So if you have Borderlands 2 or Borderlands Pre-Sequel, you'll be able to get the enhancements of the like the 4K display and the better textures and the overall like ambient like anti-aliasing and all that stuff for Borderlands, because Borderlands is a really, really great game franchise, and they have a lot of cool features in it, but their style is like super unique, and like getting that upgraded to kind of see like what can be like for the next version of Borderlands that's coming out. I don't know, maybe this year or something. That's really cool that they're doing it, because it also shows that Aspyr, while if you already have these upgrades are free for people who already own the game. So it's great to see that they're adding it to the people to continue to develop their port for the Linux platform.
Yeah, it's really important, because there are some cases where we'll get the game on Linux, but then they'll release DLC and they don't spend the time to give us the DLC for a Linux port. On a game. And the DLC can be, that's a lot of the fun that you have with not only PC and being able to, see the different enhancements that are done for remastering, but also some of the changes and levels, and basically continuing to get value out of a game long past the first moment you bought it. Borderlands would definitely be in my top favorite games of all time category.
Totally
I just think it's one of the greatest first-person shooters with one of the funniest storylines. It is a more adult level storylines, like the language and things like that. So I wouldn't recommend, if you have kids, to play this in front of them. But certainly this is just one of the greatest game IPs out. There is Borderlands 3 coming out, but there's some controversy around that with the store and whether we're going to see it ever.
They did an Epic Store exclusive and stuff. Yeah.
But the Epic Store exclusive apparently is only going to be for a period of time while it's in beta. So hopefully we'll get our hands on, because they've done a good job of giving us all the other Borderlands natively to Linux before. So hopefully we'll see Borderlands 3 as well. But Chris, I know you game some. Borderlands fan at all?
Yeah, I like Borderlands 2. I think a lot of Linux gamers really should keep Borderlands pretty close to their heart, because I remember when Steam first came to Linux, and I think Borderlands 2 was a very early release on that platform. It's one of the very early ports to Linux, and I think that I think you're right. I think the Epic Store specifically for Borderlands 3 is only a timed exclusive. So I'd be really disappointed if they didn't bring it back to Linux as well, because it's had so much adoration from the Linux gaming community as well. I don't know any person who games in a widespread capacity that hasn't at least picked up Borderlands 2. And I'm not a big shooter person in general, but Borderlands 2 is one of those games where you can drop in for like half an hour, and just make some progress, and then get back to your life, and then come back. It's not one of those games where you have to be too involved. You can be, you can be as involved in it or as much of a casual gamer as you like. I do believe that there is already Borderlands 2 DLC, which is already Linux compatible. So there is promise in that regard. But and also it's good to see that they're making some graphical improvements for those of us without 4K monitors. I don't even have a high def monitor. I'm on 1440 by 900 resolution.
What is that, like CRT? You just see everything in green. It's not far off, but I can't throw out working stuff. I mean, it works. It's
fair.
And I even actually picked up a backup monitor from a second-hand sale, same resolution, but it was £8. I mean, you can't say no to that, can you?
You're very much like Michael, I could say.
Yeah. Like, I agree that as far as Borderlands goes, like the interesting thing is that Gearbox hasn't done any of the development for the Linux version of Borderlands. That was all done by Aspyr Media, and we haven't really got any information about whether Aspyr Media is planning to make a port of Borderlands 3 or not. So if you would like to, I'm not saying you have to, but if you would like to tweet Aspyr Media and ask them about it and let them know there's a lot of people who want this game, that's an option for you. But
a nice tweet, not like, hey, your site's crap, do you want to hire me type of tweet?
Right, not that tweet, yes. Thank you very much for all the stuff you did for Borderlands 2 and pre-sequel and everything, that kind of tweet. Because the game is awesome, and being able to play it is all thanks to Aspyr Media, so that is fantastic for them. And if you haven't played Borderlands 2, Borderlands pre-sequel is fun. Borderlands 2 is awesome. It's one of the best games ever, with the probably arguably one of the best villains ever. So if you haven't played it, you definitely need to, Noah. And
name a time. Listen, I keep hearing all these rumors about a Destination Linux gaming night, but so far I haven't been invited to one. So there's
if we set a time, Michael wouldn't show up on time anyways. That's the problem.
That's not untrue.
Pick a time. Tell Michael 3 hours earlier, and then I'll meet you there.
And then Chris, would you join us for a gaming session?
Absolutely.
Nice.
Okay, whatever time we say, show up 3 hours after that.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, whatever.
But he doesn't deny it. See, that's what I love about you.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not incorrect. I was late to this episode, but whatever.
SuperTuxKart is the most beloved Linux game and continues to get improvements. A new release candidate 0.10 is out and includes improvements to its multiplayer support. In addition to improved online play, they have replaced the old mansion track with upgraded Raven Bridge Mansion. Additionally, the Black Forest add-on is now in the official track set. Kart classes have been rebalanced and fixed many unintended shortcuts and issues with the maps. The game is entirely free and open source, so if you've not tried SuperTuxKart, you need to. It will be available in your distribution's native repository, I highly suspect. You can pick it up almost everywhere, and I think you can pick it up as a flat pack as well.
I know you can get it as a snap. I'm not sure about a flat pack, but probably.
I would expect so. Anyway, it's pretty much, you can find it pretty much everywhere. In fact, you can even download the binary off the website and just run it as is. That's how I got to trying the release candidate. I played it on stream. I think it was the day before yesterday, and the improvements are actually looking pretty nice. The most striking ones have been the graphics, and people might have scoffed at the not quite graphically fidelity. They might have scoffed at it not being necessarily as nice looking as perhaps some of its AAA competitors, but they've certainly stepped up the graphics, their graphics game lately. I didn't get too much of a chance to play the online play because it's still being very much in its early stages. There aren't too many people around to play. But it is actually one that I do recommend people check out, because it has this real charm. Like, it's not trying to sell you the same kind of experience that commercial for-profit games are trying to sell you. It's a by the community for the community type of game. You race as all the little as the Linux and BSD mascots as well, so you can play as Tux the Penguin, as Zoo the XFCE mouse. I didn't know that they were called Zoo.
Yeah.
There's Conky as well. And one of the things that I really do and really am quite impressed with SuperTuxKart is that their add-on framework as well. You can download carts from like 5 years ago and they still work. They just drop in and work. You can play as the transmission thing. I don't know quite what it is, but they've turned the logo into a vehicle and you can just race as that vehicle.
Nice.
And for those of you who are thinking about checking it out, right? Here's what I highly recommend you do, right? You go to the follow the leader mode, which is effectively you have a lead car. You have to stay as close to second place as possible. So you can't overtake the car, but you have to stay, behind them. But you also have to stay in front of your competitors. Then up the number of AI carts to the maximum that you're allowed. And play on the Scotland map as well. That's always a fun map, right? Because it's absolute bedlam. So you've got like all these countless Linux mascots just trying to bash each other off the road. While trying to maintain second place. So it doesn't spread out like you do with a normal race where you get, people, run ahead in the lead and fall back behind at the back. No, you get like it's absolute chaos there. Also, another good mode in it is I shouldn't really refer to it as a Rocket League mode, but it is a Rocket League mode, right?
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about their Rocket League mode is that it actually predates Rocket League. I think I reviewed it on my channel some time ago, and I think I might have offhandedly referred to it as based on Rocket League or ripped off from Rocket League, and I was corrected with evidence. Actually, I was pointed to a forum post where they were actually working out this particular football with cars mode, or I suppose as Americans might refer to it, soccer with cars mode.
When was the forum? When was the post? Like, what was the year that they had that discussion?
Oh, I can't remember now, but it's certainly well in advance of Rocket League.
Well, there's a difference between being advanced of Rocket League and being advanced of the people who made Rocket League, because they also made another version in 2008 that was the same idea of the game, but it wasn't called Rocket League at the time. It was called Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Power Battle Cars.
Okay, well, it might not necessarily.
But then they decided that acronym was a little unpronounceable, so they went with Rocket League.
A little bit ridiculous. And also they had people who were like game critics who refused to review their game just because of their name was so ridiculous and they didn't want to write it out. But yeah, so they
tried to review it, but YouTube wouldn't word wrap that far. So
exactly. So, but anyway, it's still, I agree that mode is really fun. It's ridiculous, but it is a really fun mode because it's like, I don't know if you could play that online. I hope you can, because that would be amazing. But me and Ryan actually got the chance to play SuperTuxKart online, and we had a couple of people with us as well. And I just want to point out that Ryan cheated. There was absolute evidence. I have replays and everything.
Did he? What did he do? Did he show up on time and practice beforehand?
No, I don't know if he practiced. He was definitely there before I was, but I was given the notice late, so it wasn't my fault in this particular situation. But I do have replays, and I do have examples where he was using illegal weapons in the game, and therefore it was totally.
Listen, this is. Let me picture the game for you. Here's the wall and the track, and here's Michael's car. And that was Michael the whole time, and then the rest of us were just going around the crash site.
That's ridiculous. Race. I did hit the wall a couple times, though. That's true.
Our software spotlight this week is Key-Mon. That's a utility to show a live keyboard and mouse for teaching and screencasts. It has a simple and really nice to use graphical interface that will show you how long the clicks of the mouse are, the presses of the keys are. This is a software that I was not previously familiar with, but as a person who does a lot of tutorials and actually is scheduled to film his next tutorial this week on setting up a YubiKey to do SSH authentication, shameless self-plug. This is something that I'll absolutely take advantage of. So the program is called Key-Mon. That's KEY-MON, and we'll have more information for you in the show notes.
Yeah, I love this utility. I used it in my Lightworks tutorial, which the Patreon.
Did you really?
for my channel were asking for a Lightworks tutorial. And one of the things I was worried about is when you get into something, even when you're teaching it, there are times where you'll move down and do something real quick because maybe it's not the main point of what you're discussing. And then you'll go to talk about what you're talking about. But this allows, by displaying the on-screen keyboard and your mouse clicks, this gets the chance for them to see, even if you forget to mention exactly what you were doing or adjusting there. Exactly, they get to see the screen. So if they want to replicate it, or you leave something out or forget to talk about the key that you hit there, then it shows it right there on the screen, so they can just watch what you're doing right there. And it's really well done, and it stays out of your way. And I like you can drag it anywhere as well, so it's not one of those things where it's like stuck in the upper corner and you can't move it anywhere. It's just a really cool tool.
Nice. And actually, it's I agree that's a really cool. Just being able to move it around, being able to like not cover over the software that you're trying to demonstrate, because a lot of these types of software and other platforms will do that, where they'll just cover the stuff you wanted to show. Exactly. But if you have I've done it many times where I would do a shortcut and then forget that the shortcut I used was a custom shortcut I decided, and then people ask me, how would you do that? And I tell them, like, that's not how it works. Like, okay, I need to remember that these things exist and I have to change the shortcuts and everything. But I also have to say that this is a tip that Ryan not only introduced Noah to, this is the first time I've heard of it as well. So I am looking forward to trying it out for my next tutorial.
I finally found something you all didn't know.
I was just going to say, it's almost as if like Ryan should be the one doing how-tos instead of Michael and I. Yeah, no, just say it.
In this particular case, maybe.
Finally, I find something you guys haven't already used. So this tip and trick of the week, I know Michael and Noah are familiar with, but maybe you aren't. It's Wget and curl commands. So these commands, or command line tools, I should say, allow you to download from FTP, HTTP, or HTTPS. A lot of times people use them interchangeably. Both can send HTTP post requests, both support HTTP cookies, both are designed to work without user interaction, like from within scripts. Both are fully open source and free software. Both were started in the 90s. Both support MetaLink. So it gets confusing when you should use one or the other, but I think the best way to put it is curl offers a lot of options that you can do more advanced things with it within your bash script, whereas Wget just is for going out there and downloading information. So if one of the use cases, if you've not used these before and you're wondering why would I use some of this? In my bash script, for instance, the installer Noah mentioned that I use and others use sometimes when they have a brand new Linux install, and it goes through and it finds the software and you just check the boxes and installs it for you. Some of the software is available in a repository. Some of it may be an app image or something that you need to get offline. Using Wget, I am able to, within the bash script, go out to that website, grab that link for the latest software, download it down onto the machine, and then the rest of the bash script executes to install that for you. So that would be one use case for this, but I'm sure there are dozens or thousands of options more for them. They're both very powerful tools. Anybody else here use Wget or curl?
I use both of them. I use curl more than Wget because one of the things I love about curl's function is that it is a little bit more powerful, but also you can use it to send data rather than just pull down data. So I use curl to send a payload of information to from one computer to another, and the reason I do it is because I wrote a bash script that will allow you to basically Chromecast, but not Chromecast, cast media to a Kodi device, and it'll be on your local network, and it uses curl to get the payload. The bash script figures out what plugin it needs to use and everything, and then it uses curl to send it to the device and say, use this plugin, here's the media you want to play, and then it will set it up and play it. So curl is very powerful.
Every server I log into, the very first thing I install is Wget so that I'm able to get information down. Then actually, interestingly enough, the very second thing I do is I Wget an authorized key file that's stored on one of our servers that gives access to the server to puts all of the employees that work for Altispeed Technologies, installs their SSH keys into that server so that we're able to authenticate into it. Core component of that is Wget.
Very cool.
I actually used it just the other day when I was moving a website over to NeoCities. And effectively what I wanted to do was just pull down the website almost so that I could just get rid of it and forget about it. So I tend to use Wget because like I'm a bit simple and that just seems to be easier to use.
Right.
But so I just managed to basically do a backup of a website, easy as that. And then I could just sort of scrape that for information offline and then put it back up as a NeoCities site.
Very cool. All right. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. And we also love our patrons and coffee supporters. So I just want to give a special shout out to all of you for your support. We do a live show for patrons. So you can come and join us or be part of the show. You can join for just $1, and that's darn near free. And you will get to see all the bloopers and behind the scenes and mess ups and everything else. Of course, this show, since we were lucky enough to have Chris on with us co-hosting, actually went pretty flawlessly for the first time. So Chris, you brought us a little bit of good luck there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I could be a lucky Welshman.
There you go.
We're also on Ko-fi. That's a way that you can support the show. Ko-fi offers a nice monthly option that'll allow you to have the same perks as Patreon. There'll be a link for the show in the show notes for the website to join Ko-fi. The perks include things like access to live shows, unedited versions of the shows, and our most sincere gratitude. Now, this week, you're going to get a little shorted because Chris kept us on schedule. And so this might be the earliest we're going to get done recording an episode of Destination Linux. And so but the flip side is it'll be a much better Patreon and coffee show. Thanks to Chris.
Yep,
there you
absolutely.
go.
Although, to be fair, the last time I was on, it was one of the longest episodes. So, you got to address the balance.
Exactly.
There you go. I like it.
So please get back with us and let us know what you think. Ask any burning questions via the numerous methods that we have here. The email, comments@destinationlinux.org, Telegram groups, Discord, Twitter, Mastodon, and other ways you can find us over at destinationlinux.org/contact. Please keep the comments and questions coming. We love to read them and hear ways that we might be able to improve the show. We also love compliments, so send those along as well.
Exactly. As many as you want.
Yeah.
And the show doesn't stop here. We actually have our own channels. You can go check out youtube.com/DasGeek for Ryan's content, where he talks about various different hardware stuff, as far as like also testing different games in Linux, which is really cool. You can check out Noah's content by going to the AskNoahShow.com, where he does the Ask Noah Show podcast about and also radio show about like people are allowed to call in and ask questions about business and tech and Linux. You can also check out my content at tuxdigital.com, where you can also find the This Week in Linux podcast, where it's a news podcast that has not just the headlines, but also very in-depth coverage over all the topics that are covered in the show. You can also find Zeb. Zeb was not able to appear to this episode, but you can go to his content at youtube.com/ZebedeeBoss. And in the place of Zeb, thank you very much, Chris, for coming to the show and help co-host for us. You can find his content by going to youtube.com/ChrisWere or ChrisWereDigital. And you can remember to like that smash button and to share the show on social media.
That's right. So everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.